All right, going across to Atul. Atul, there we heard before we dipped into President Xi's speech, Andrew speak about the previous 5 years of President Xi's tenure. Now, looking ahead, what do you expect from his second consecutive 5-year term? Where does President Xi go from here, especially at a time when already many people around the world are calling him the most powerful leader in recent Chinese history?
Well, I would agree with what Andrew has said. The first 5 years has been a phase of consolidation because China was moving to a new transition, and there were serious threats to the legitimacy of the party. Now, that seems to have been sorted out almost completely, except I do think that because of the relentless anti-corruption campaign, especially in the military, it is still a work in progress in terms of consolidation and unifying and coming to a modernization of the PLA. Not in just terms of arms and equipment, but in terms of personnel and institutions. I mean, that's a work in progress which President Xi would have to carry forward in the next five years. What we do expect is, again, meeting those specific goals, doubling the GDP and lifting still 7 million people out of poverty. 70 million people out of poverty. So that's going to be quite a challenge, and which would also mean in terms of his supply side economy, that you're creating 13 million jobs a year, but you have to continue to do that and lift these people out of poverty. That's not going to be an easy task in such a short timeline. So economy is going to be a major focus, and within the frame of economy, you have to look at what happens to this surplus capital which China has accumulated over the years. And that's where Belt and Road comes in, because unless you move capital and industrialize other parts of the world along what is called the Old Silk Road and the Maritime Silk Road, especially the land corridor into Central Asia, the South Asia, Pakistan, etc., I mean, then that's going to be a huge economic challenge. So that's something which has to, the next stage of economic development, which is Industry 4.0, building an advanced economy, which is based on 10 basic things like aviation, big data, etc. Now these things have to be works in progress, and deleveraging the economy, because there's so much of debt which is accumulated. So I think that's going to be a major task to accomplish to achieve that moderately prosperous society. So that's going to be, economy is very important. Second thing, of course, is the security side. That China is rising, but does it lead to what we just heard, a community of shared destiny, which is a win-win for all? Or do we see and China leading globalization in a way with America sort of giving it that role and receding? We saw that during the Davos meeting with President Xi Jinping announcing China's commitment to globalization. So that's the benign side. This is going to be a big challenge, that while you grow, how do you carry other nations along with you? I think he's going to address that, and it's going to take quite a lot of effort to achieve this community of shared destiny, which is that all benefit from industrialization and connectivity. These are two major challenges. I think there's another element. Today, what President Xi Jinping has announced is that there is a new system which you're talking about, which is ready to be spread to developing countries. That they are no longer defensive on the Chinese model. The Chinese model of development is also an exportable, I don't think commodity is the right word, but something which can be exported to other developing countries, whether it comes through the BRICS framework or the Belt and Road, we don't know. But that sense of proactivism, the sense of self-confidence in the system, rather than following the Western system, I think that gets reinforced again today, and that will be something which we have to watch out in the next 5 years.
Right. It's getting to 8 a.m. India time, or 10:30 a.m. in Beijing, or 2:30 in the GMT time. But going back across to Andrew. Andrew, in my last question to you, I asked you to look back in the rearview mirror, as it were. Now I want you to gaze into the crystal ball and look ahead and tell all the people watching WION this morning in India and around the world, where does she go from here, especially in terms of anointing his successors possibly towards the end of the the National Congress, especially as you mentioned, the number 2, the anti-corruption czar Wang. Where do you see him in the next 5 years? And also whether President Xi is gravitating towards a more influential role like never before, especially in the role played by Chairman Mao several decades ago.
So the whole world is watching, as you said, and a lot of speculation saying that because he's so powerful, is he going to be another Chairman Mao with all that implies? Is he going to be another dictator? Is China going to be a more authoritarian kind of nation, threatening the rest of the world with its rise? So all this is a kind of one-sided thing. Of course, as I was trying to say, when Xi Jinping took over, the party was facing an systematic existential threat. And now he's relatively successful in calming down the waters, but a lot of work remains undone. So I think that he rightly stressed many times the need for the party to continue to reinvent itself, to justify its legitimacy in terms of the rising aspirations of the people. But because of all these vested interests, because of this backlash against so many different provinces and so on and so forth, he needed to concentrate power. Otherwise, things would be slowed down and there would be repercussions. There would be people dragging their feet and doing nothing, as it were, at best. This is not going to realize his China dream. So part of the reason why he wanted to concentrate power in almost all sectors is to continue to this dynamism that concentrate like a convex lens, that concentrates sunlight into a particular direction to move the nation forward. Now, in the process, of course, there will be a kind of repercussions, more crackdown on perhaps on civil society. But then in the overall scheme of things, his popularity, for example, amongst the people, judging by the PEW kind of survey based in Washington, D.C., has been unprecedented. It's very, very high. Now, secondly, he also pointed out that China is facing a very challenging but very exceptional phase in world history, where the existing superpower, the United States, for example, seems to be retracting from a lot of international obligations and is in fact facing indeed a relative limited capacity as the leader of the world, and this opens up the kind of elbow room for China nation to assert itself. But in the process, of course, there are all these the kind of perceptions that, for example, China in Africa, disregard of the environment, lack of corporate governance, and also the bringing a lot of the Chinese businesses there, destroying the local informal economy. All these matters have to be dealt with. But I think that the next 10 years will see of course, consolidating his power. Now, you mentioned Wang Xishan. Whether he's going to stay on his president job is still unknown until the final moment. Indeed, there are a number of key issues to watch out. What is where is Wang Xishan? I mean, if he's not there, who is going to take over his job? Because the anti-corruption campaign is not over. And if he's not going to stay in his present job, what role will he play, considering he's a very, very close ally of Xi Jinping? Secondly, of course, there's the body of opinion suggests that the Prime Minister Li Keqiang is going to stay. Then what's the size of the Bureau Standing Committee? Will there be continue to be 7 members, or could there be 5? So there was a lot of speculation. If it's going to be 5, it means the power would be further concentrated. Right. If it is 5, what about the places for some of his proteges and some of the key rising stars? You know, like Wu Chunhua, who was tipped to be his successor, and also Wang Yang and various people. Now, indeed, the whole question whether there is an anointed successor is still up in the air until the final moment, the conclusion of the 19th Party Congress. And you look at the people there in the final run-up, who are the favorites and whether there are some sort of hidden agenda that someone is going to be successor still remains uncertain. So indeed, it is quite possible that because of all these problems China is facing, he may even contemplate a third term. Let's not forget the present rules of two-term succession is not cast in stone. So things are still up for grabs at the moment.
Right. Andrew, if I heard you correctly and understood you correctly, you are not ruling out the possibility of President Xi Jinping getting for himself a third term in power?
Yes. I mean, if you look at the commentary in the Western press, some leading think tanks, they share this view. Because at the moment, you look at the there was a former favorite, Su Jin-chai, who was a rising star. He's pretty young and is now being detained and soon stripped of his party membership. And there was, and also previously a favorite, Hu Chunhua, who is the party secretary, who was the party secretary of Guangdong, also a rising star. It seems that his prospects are a little bit eclipsed, but still he's very, very strong. Now, there was also a kind of a reading in the West, very popular, saying that there are two factions. One is the princelings, and one is the so-called Tuanpai, means the people whose fathers or his parents are not revolutionaries,
right.
exemplified by Hu Jintao. And these two factions are fighting tooth and nail. But if you look at the lineup, the previous lineup, there's always a balance between the princelings and between the Tuanpai. Maybe during one administration, the Tuanpai was in ascendance. Maybe during another period, the other side was in ascendance. But there is a need to balance the background, because the backgrounds are very different. For example, the people who are not the princelings, they have huge experience in governing the provinces. And we are seeing that even in the final tentative list, most favored by commentators, it include a number of Tuanpai. I mean, like Hu Chunhua, like Wang Yang. I mean, these are not princelings, but you can't get rid of them. And in fact, they play a positive role in underpinning the legitimacy of the Communist Party.
Fair point. Your point is well taken, Andrew. Atul, as President Xi enters his second consecutive 5-year term and possibly a third term, as Andrew was referring to there, what does it mean, or what might it mean for countries in China's neighborhood, including but not limited to India, in terms of security, especially as President Xi in his speech referred to powerful military with Chinese characteristics, in addition to his remark about diplomacy with Chinese characteristics. On balance, how will it pan out for countries in China's neighborhood, including India, in terms of security? Atul.
Well, you see, with the rise of Chinese economy and its economic engagement with the rest of the world, its reliance on supplies from oil to raw materials, etc., from abroad, it is natural that the Chinese military will grow commensurate to protect these economic lifelines of trade and resources. So that's something which is normal and natural to accept. But then, how do you actually implement? I do think when it comes to India's case, China will play a major role than what it is doing now in the Indian Ocean. And that goes along with its vision of the maritime Silk Road. Now, I think that's something which is going to be, can be a challenge for India. What we do need, and we have discussed this before, is that how do we manage this? The rise of China, is there going to be a military-to-military strategic dialogue between India and China? On how do you manage the rise of China without it posing a threat to any of these countries?
Right.
ASEAN is another area. They are going to be looking at how China goes around its business in the South China Sea, for example, which have areas of maritime disputes. I think these are big challenges for China if it wants to play its due role, especially what Andrew said, is a growing vacuum in the international system. Then it has to carry everyone along with it through dialogue and persuasion. Because frankly, I don't think that is Xi Jinping's intent. But if you muscle your way through, that's not going to be unworkable and going to meet a lot of resistance. This is a very big challenge. Ramesh, regarding how do you manage your economic rise and your military rise in a manner which is acceptable to all. I think that's next 5 years are going to test the Chinese leadership on that.
Right. Andrew, just to quote President Xi, he said, China's international standing has risen. China is growing rich and becoming strong, and that Chinese wisdom can help solve some, if not all, of the world's problems. Now, if you look at China's immediate neighborhood, and in the last 5 years especially, would you agree with President Xi when he says China's standing has risen, especially in the context of the South China Sea issue and the Hague ruling which went against him, be it the issue of the North Korean tension, the tensions on the Korean Peninsula, or even domestically, maybe in Tibet or Xinjiang, and also on the issue of corruption? I mean, would you categorize these as successes or failures?
Well, of course, this is a mixed picture. I mean, it's not a black and white thing. China has, as Xi Jinping, as President Xi admits, full of problems. And China is, in fact, a huge country in transition. But let's look at the growth in influence. There is no doubt that China is much more influential than before. You mentioned the South China Sea, of course, the ASEAN countries. Now look at China's neighbors. Especially the ASEAN countries, they would like to hedge against China by calling for American intervention, American support. But on the other hand, they don't want to antagonize China because their economies depend on China and for the creation of their own jobs, for the drive of their economy. So they don't want to antagonize China, and because of that, this is a reflection of the influence China is exerting. Now, as for the rest of the world, of course, climate change, China is playing a tremendously very important role, especially after the withdrawal of the United States from the Paris Agreement, and of course, along with India, driving the global agenda towards a greener future. And indeed, you look at the renewable energies, China is leading in solar power, in wind power, in hydropower, and of course, even in Europe, China's investments is all over the world. And of course, the investment is not a kind of charity. Obviously, there are benefits for China, but on the other hand, the investments bring jobs, bring much welcomed investment in infrastructure, for example, all over the world, and particularly in the One Belt, One Road. But of course, that all this brings problems as well. Now, I like to use analogy of a panda. When a panda grows to, say, 10,000 tons, I mean, even if it's a very mild nature panda, it threatens people. It's inevitable. So even though China's always pushes its rhetoric of a benign growth, but inevitably people feel a little bit frightened. And this is understandable. So President Xi has got to manage this. And of course, China doesn't want a war. I mean, over the next couple of decades, right, China needs a very benign environment to achieve its goal. But on the other hand, China's rise presents its challenges, and of course, is one of the key agenda of the next 5 years and beyond.
Atul, just to give our viewers some background or context here and perspective, the Communist Party of China was established in 1921. So come 2021, the CPC will be celebrating its centenary. Similarly, the People's Republic of China was established in 1949, so it's been more than 68 years and counting now. And the PLA, for its part, was established in 1927, and it just completed on the 17th of August its 90th anniversary. Now, quoting from President Xi's remarks, Atul, he said, and I quote him, "Scientific socialism is flying high for all to see, and that China must guard against attempts to split China, and sovereignty and security must be ensured." Now, what might be the context of some of these remarks, Atul? Could it be that next year China will surpass the former Soviet Union as the longest ruling communist party in the world. Would that be at the back of his mind?
Well, what Xi Jinping is trying to say is the enduring role of the party, and there is no timeline for that. That's number one, and he's reinforcing that particular point. You talked about 2021. I think that's a very, very important benchmark, the centenary of the formation of the party, and that's where the economy has to double from the 2010 level, along with achieving other indices such as environment, etc., which he has talked about. So I think that it becomes very, very important. Now, why the focus on that is the context is much larger, Ramesh. The context in which the party is existing right now. I mean, if you look at the collapse of the Soviet Union, which happens in 1991, now there have been a series of the system of socialism or scientific socialism was threatened in the sense that Yugoslavia collapsed and you had regime changes all over. In the Middle East, you had entire Arab socialist governments starting from Saddam Hussein to Gaddafi, you know, and then Iran gets threatened, Syria, you know what's happened. So there's a larger context in which the system has to survive. And today, I think he's sending a message across that not only is the system going to survive, but it has got something which can be serve as a model for many developing countries. So you have sort of, you know, combated the tide of regime change and the threat to so-called democratic revolutions, what happened in Arab Spring, etc. And now you have reached a stage where you're saying, okay, 2021 is only, you know, a blip. We are going to not only have a moderately prosperous society, but, you know, while we were speaking, he's also talked about 2035 to 2049. That would be the phase of building an advanced system, and the Chinese dream and rejuvenation fits into that framework. So it's a very confident Xi Jinping and a confident China, which is proactive, which is forward-looking, and instead of being inward-looking, is willing and wanting to engage with the world. I think these are some of the messages which are going across from the work report, which President Xi has just read out or is reading out.
Right, and I want to throw that same question across to Andrew. Andrew, Atul was mentioning about the bigger picture that President Xi has drawn for himself and the party. Issues such as the so-called Arab Spring, or attempts to split China, as President Xi himself said, or even the protests that one gets to hear and watch in Hong Kong and in Taiwan to some extent. How serious a threat do you think might be issues of a repeat of the so-called Arab Spring in China, or issues such as referendum as the one we've seen in Catalonia in Spain, or in Scotland, or in the UK over Brexit? How serious do you think this threat might be for the one-party rule in China going forward?
Well, right from the very start, in fact, after the collapse of the former USSR, that was a very, very big lesson to the Communist Party. We're not, don't forget, that was the collapse of a very large one, if not has been the leader of the communist movement for a very, very long time, you know, since the Second World War. And it collapsed, the former USSR. That was a big, big lesson for China. What happened to the collapse had been studied, you know, sort of in depth. What caused the collapse was that the Soviet Union, the USSR, followed the Western example of a kind of one-size-fits-all formula. Everything needs to happen within 500 days. The so-called Harvard formula, where not only political change but economic change, you know, following the kind of privatization and also liberalizing everything and opening up the politics. And then what happened? that was a very, very big lesson for China. So since then, I think China has examined itself, the Communist Party, and trying to move forward using the expression, feeling the stones as you cross the river. Now, that's very important. Now, the second point about separatism, you look at China's history. For a long, long time, China was not unified. In fact, of course, that was the first emperor, but even after the first emperor, there was a lot of the provinces and into wars within the nation. And of course, in the beginning of the Communist Party, there was the rivalry with the Kuomintang, and of course the various other provinces, especially including Tibet and Xinjiang. The lesson was that unless the country is united, it's not going to be strong, it's not going to be powerful, it's likely to be partitioned by the great powers. And indeed, China was the first country that studied the rise of the great powers in the past 500 years and make that into a national TV film. But I think that this is a big lesson. So China needs to concentrate the productive forces of the entire Chinese nation, try to unify the Chinese nation, of course take cognizance of the fact that there are aspirations in different provinces, in places like even Hong Kong or Taiwan, and they need to manage that. But it also strengthens the party's determination that unless you unify the whole country, is very bad news for the whole nation and for the people of China as well.
Right, it's been 1 hour and 40 minutes since President Xi began his speech, and he is going strong. And I'm joined by my guests, Atul Aneja from Beijing and Andrew K.P. Long from Hong Kong. Atul, if I can come to you now, you're in Beijing. Give us a flavor or sense, if you will, about the weather, literally and metaphorically, in the run-up to the Party Congress. What are you picking up? What are you hearing about the optics about the Party Congress within China?
Well, it's all over the media. This is a once-in-5-year event, and especially the 19th Party Congress is being projected as a benchmark. You know that this is a new stage, and we are moving into a new direction. So a sense of a new beginning, let's put it, is there in the media reflection.
All right, I'm now joined by my guests. Andrew K.P. Leong continues to be with us this morning. He joins us from Hong Kong. And joining me now live on the special broadcast is Einar Thangun, who joins us from Beijing. Einar, good morning. Good to have you back on WION. I want to begin by asking you straight away about your initial impressions about President Xi's ongoing speech and also the big takeaways for you.
Terribly sorry. I think we have a bad connection.
All right, Einar, we'll try to fix that line with you in a bit. But Andrew, if you're still with me and can hear me, we were discussing about President Xi's speech there, which is almost nearing 2 hours now. And he seems to have given a broad brush idea of the previous 5 years and where he wants to see China, the party and the government over the next 5 years. Now, on balance, even as he delivers his speech there from the Great Hall of the People in Beijing, the big picture that's emerging for you, in your estimation, what might that be?
Well, definitely, this is a wise, sweeping speech, and it's very, very long. I mean, in fact, I need to be going in half an hour's time. You know, it's been going on for a long, long time. But the message is that it is a historic moment for the Communist Party, and it's a historical moment for the Chinese nation. And then he is grasping this moment. He's seizing the opportunity and is rallying his party members as well as the entire Chinese nation to look at the opportunities and also unveiling all these emerging challenges which calls for unity, innovation, and so on. But the interesting thing, and they see he is referring to democracy or intra-party democracy. So a lot of people in the West don't understand what we're talking about. I mean, how can you have democracy when you have a one-party system? But then here lies in the difference in interpretation or perception. If you look at China's history, There were the in the ancient times, there were the dynasties. Some dynasties lasted only a few decades. Some dynasties lasting for several hundred years. And then the legitimacy is the so-called mandate of the people, provided the government. Don't forget, no matter how many parties you have, there can be only one government at any one time. So provided the government delivers, that's the legitimacy. And then within the system, of course, democracy, apart from multi-party rivalry or elections, is about the people. A livelihood of the people, things like inequalities and also social justice. So all these are the same kind of problems, even you have a one party. So the idea of the Communist Party is that provided the party continues to reinvent itself, continue to listen to the people, continue to push the country forward, continue to improve the livelihood, and make the nation moving forward, so that all the people are proud of. So that is the legitimacy, even though it's a one party. And within the one party system, they can have a lot of consultations, opening up channels and listening to people. If you look at the laws enacting in China now, it's preceded by a lot of public consultations and of course input from various research groups and so on and so forth. And then of course, because of a one party state, it doesn't have to worry about electoral cycles of the next 4 years or 5 years. It can take a very, very long term. So there are advantages in the context of China. Don't forget, China is not trying to export as it tried to export communism in the early days. China has never said, well, our system works, let the rest of the world follow it. No, I mean, if we look at even Xi Jinping himself said, well, this is a Chinese model, we'll stick to it. But that doesn't necessarily mean that this is, he used the word unique, cannot be just applied, to other countries. But increasingly, some countries are saying, hey, well, there may be something we can learn from it.
Indeed, your point is well taken. Andrew, while we are waiting for Einar to join us, is Einar with us? Einar, can you hear me?
Yes, I am.
All right, good to have you join us this morning, Einar. I want to begin by asking you for your big takeaways to your estimation from President Xi's speech, which, as we continue, is nearing the 2-hour mark. The big takeaways in your estimation from President Xi's speech this morning.
Well, this is really laying out a ground map for his troops. If you go back to his original address 5 years ago, when he took the presidium as the president of China, he outlined what he thought were the challenges. And now he's saying, look, 5 years later, we've made a tremendous amount of progress. And he's really telling these delegates who are about to receive 2 reports, first one being the work report of the committee, the most important one. This is going to outline every single thing that they hope to accomplish in the next 5 years. And then they'll have a report about party discipline, basically anti-corruption. And the third part is the election of the Central Party. So these members will then in turn to elect the Standing Committee. So this is his opportunity to show that progress has been made, to get people enthused about the direction they're going in. A lot of this is, yes, it's partly show in the sense that we're not expecting a dramatic outcome. This is not a contest. But it is very important that he establish his links and gives his rationale for what he's doing. I mean, there's been tremendous amounts of effort put into anti-corruption. Obviously, it's touched on people that the delegates know, and how they feel about that and the direction is very important. She set out to reform the party, and that's what he's telling is going to continue to happen.
Einar, Andrew, who is also joining us and has been discussing and parsing President Xi's remarks for the benefit of the viewers who've been watching this special broadcast. Now, Andrew believes that President Xi might not be in the same league as Chairman Mao today, but is definitely on course and possibly could get might want a third term for himself after the end of his decade-long rule. Your thoughts, Einar, is that a possibility or a probability in your estimation?
Well, we'll see in a little bit. I think there is a possibility that it will continue. He'll go 5 years beyond the norm. The challenges he's taken on are enormous. Trying to move the country, not only reform the Communist Party to get back this kind of mandate of the people. I think in the past for the emperors was the mandate of heaven, but in this particular case, he's looking to reaffirm. I think he's done a tremendous amount of work and achieved a lot of progress in this result, in this regard. So how it's going to go. There's also the issue that with anti-corruption, he's made enemies. Obviously, those he has put away would like to strike back at him. For both of these reasons, I think that Xi needs to prolong put his mark onto these things. I mean, China needs to get beyond the 2022 program where they say they're going to have this kind of moderately prosperous society. They need to reform a lot of things, get past the middle income trap. They feel that there are threats out there, a very uncertain U.S. Headed by Donald Trump, uncertainties economically. And, you know, I would agree with my previous colleague, what he said, you know, this is a large change. China is following a model that has never, it's not following model, it's creating a new model. Now, whether or not people follow that is another thing, but with all of the difficulties that are being had with electoral systems and democracy, people are reassessing this kind of post-World War II Cold War idea that the end of history is composed of democracy and capitalism.
Einar, the party congress will be a week-long event, but towards the end of the congress, or even before that, would the world have a fair idea of the generation next, as it were, of the Communist Party and possibly a successor to President Xi, unless, as Andrew was saying there, he does not opt for a third consecutive term. So, in your estimation, can we have an early look or a peek into the generation next of the party in China?
Well, a lot of that depends. Everybody is kind of sitting on pins and needles. They're concentrating on the optics of the individuals involved. I don't think it is as important as people think. However, in terms of the next generation, understand that you have to serve an apprenticeship. E.g., you have to be nominated to the standing committee, serve 5 years before you can kind of take over the reins of power. This is very corporate in nature, the idea that you don't want a leader coming in fresh and, you know, deciding that and not understanding everything that is going on and trying to implement things that perhaps will be counter to the way things. China is about continuity in the end. So, yes, if he nominates people from the next generation, this sixth generation of leaders, we will know. There needs to be two of them. If there's only one, and remember, one of the heir apparents, the former party secretary of Chongqing, was removed. He's been disgraced. He's been under attack in the party and facing a trial. So he's out of the running. That brings into question, can Xi nominate somebody else, and how will that be received by the delegates?
All right, Einar, do stay on. I want to go quickly across to Andrew. Andrew, I'm just going through my notes here of President Xi's remarks from the earlier part of his speech, and to my mind, he's devoted a lot of time to talk about the economy, about reforms, about national security, but very little on foreign policy per se. Now, if I were to ask you to explain or to give a sense to our viewers this morning as to what China's foreign policy might look like in the second consecutive 5-year term of President Xi, especially in relation to countries such as the US, Russia, India, and Japan. Your thoughts?
Well, thank you for raising this very, very important question, which was obviously already mentioned by President Xi several times, but not directly, in the sense of China facing a different historic environment internationally, in the sense that, as I was saying, when China grows to be a 10,000-ton panda, then everybody's worried. And of course, the geopolitics are changing. You have a different administration in the United States, which is, of course, the existing superpower. And of course, don't forget, President Xi himself voluntarily raised this concept of the Thucydides trap. In ancient times, or not even in recent times, when an existing superpower was seen to be threatened by the rising power in 12 out of 16 times, more or less, it ended in war. So that is a very, very challenging thing. And how to manage China's rise is, of course, is top of the agenda. Now, coming to direct relations with the United States, some people compare it to two, sort of husband and wife, when it's very difficult to negotiate a divorce when both share a huge fortune in the term of the investment in U.S. treasuries. I mean, there's sort of a couple of $trillion involved in there. And of course, the two countries are bound together in trade and even in international issues like North Korea, climate change, and so on. So it's very difficult to talk about a direct confrontation. And of course, there is no, unlike the previous times in the Thucydides trap, now we are in a nuclear deterrence stage, sort of mutual assured destruction. And of course, China is now, over the years, is in expanding its military capabilities, and also asymmetric capabilities, including satellites, missiles against satellites, and also so-called anti-access and area denial capabilities, threatening aircraft carriers. So, and of course, let alone nuclear power submarines. So there are a lot of things that which translate into the more remote possibility of a direct confrontation. And of course, in trade, obviously China is aware that it's being perceived in terms of violations of intellectual property and so on. But of course, the intellectual property safeguards are also very important for China, as China tries to innovate and is in fact developing a lot of innovative businesses. Think of Alibaba, and also China's now successfully launched the world's first quantum computer. So I think that there is a lot of areas for cooperation. Now, as far as India is concerned, again, the border kind of disputes have remained. And of course, the recent Dok Lam incident suggests that that's a very sensitive issue, because China cannot be seen to be weak in defending its claimed territories, either with India or in the South China Sea with Japan and so on and so forth. But how are you going to manage the kind of different expectations of China's neighbors is, of course, a major issue. And that's why I see President Xi highlighted the fact that China needs to address, the Communist Party needs to address not only internal challenges, but also the external environment. And the external environment presents a huge opportunity for the rise of China, because you can see that China's being the economy is now the second largest. If you talk about BRICS, B-R-I-C-S, China is bigger than the rest of the BRICS combined. And of course, the economy is still even at about growing at 5 or 6%, but with a much larger base. You know, if you have say $10, people expect you to make 10%. It's very easy. But if you have, you know, sort of a couple of $1 trillion, and making 10% is almost an impossibility. So that has got to be seen in this context. But overall, I think that Xi Jinping sees that the future holds a lot of possibilities for the rise of China, and how to manage it requires a stronger and more innovative party, and also as responding to the aspirations of the people, global issues like climate change, and of course international relations.
All right, you're watching the continuous coverage here on WION of the 19th Party Congress of the Communist Party of China, coming to you live from the Great Hall of the People in Beijing. And I have with me my guest, Einar Tangen from Beijing and Andrew K.P. Leong from Hong Kong. Gentlemen, do stay on while we take a quick break and we'll get back to our coverage. It is getting to 9 a.m. India time or 3:30 GMT. It is 11:30 a.m. in Beijing and President Xi is into his third hour of address. It's been 2 hours and 15 minutes and counting since he began delivering his speech, and we'll bring you all the latest from that party congress happening in Beijing in a bit. But time for a short break. Stay tuned to WION for news and updates.